back inside! I said 9!
One of 2023's main highlights for me was how Neil Patrick Harris had aced the role of the classic Doctor Who villain, the Toymaker, opposite David Tennant's 14th Doctor in The Giggle, at the final special of the Whoniverse's 60th anniversary celebrations. Before this, the Toymaker had only made one appearance in the franchise's elaborate history, leaving a lasting impression on Whovians. Later in the 1980s, executive producer John Nathan Turner had again planned to bring the Toymaker back for season 23, but sadly, the show's brief cancellation in 1985 prevented any of that from happening. But almost 3 years before The Giggle, the Toymaker was again mentioned in the Doctor Who season 12 by a villain named Zelen, who was an Eternal. Now 57 years after his first appearance, the Toymaker has returned for Doctor Who's final 60th anniversary special, and for the first time ever, he used a television broadcast to drive humanity mad. While the Toymaker had clashed against the 14th and 15th Doctors in one final game, it was actually built on the original 1966 serial, The Celestial Toymaker. It was an absolute treat to watch, with Russell T Davies and Neil Patrick Harris significantly expanding the trickster backstory and cosmic powers. Not just that, it also cemented his return as the primary villain for Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor, because in The Giggle, Neil Patrick Harris, Toymaker, made a chilling promise to the 14th and 15th Doctors by simply saying, "My legions are coming." This threat, while vague, was undeniably menacing, and Maestro's appearance in the second episode of the newest rendition of Doctor Who is all the proof you need to figure out what's coming. With his legions being the main focus of this Doctor Who season, it only makes sense that we take a look back at how the Toymaker established his reign over the decades. So without wasting another moment, let's get right to it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is the Toymaker? If I had to give you a basic idea, the Toymaker was a powerful dude who trapped sentient beings into what seemed like childish games, with their freedom always at stake. He despised losing, so of course these games were always rigged in his favor. As one of the most crazy villains in the Doctor's long roster of enemies, the Toymaker played at least 3 deadly games with him over several millennia. According to the 6th Doctor, no one truly knew who the Toymaker was, as he was described as someone who was old beyond imagination and existed even before the Time Lord records began. A team of modern Gallifreyan researchers even tried to chart his path through time, but eventually gave up after being immensely bored of all the games he played with his own past. The Doctor speculated that they did not try harder only because they failed to find a way to control him. In fact, the Toymaker was known to change his origin story in separate conversations with Adric and the 5th Doctor. Not just that, once he began changing the details of his origin story in the middle of a conversation. Apart from that, for now, all we know is that the Toymaker had a sister named Hecuba, who is apparently known as the Queen of Time, along with a child named Maestro, who's considered as the essence of music itself. And if you've been following Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor Who, I really don't need to explain what Maestro is capable of. What is the Toymaker like? Given that he's immortal, the Toymaker would have been extremely bored without his games, so he often thrived on times of chance, especially when both his skill and luck were put to the test, thus making eternity for him more bearable. One account even suggests that his prolonged isolation drove him insane, and this aligned with what the 12th Doctor acknowledged as something likely to be true. The Toymaker's games were pretty much his meat and drink. To him, the concepts of good and bad were absolutely meaningless, because what actually mattered was winning or losing. The Toymaker lost all joy if someone tried to plead or cheat in order to escape the consequences of losing, even though he himself wasn't quite above trying to talk his way out of a fair loss. His own child Maestro described him as someone who was tough, mean, and awful to them, even going out on a limb to thank the Doctor for trapping him. There are multiple accounts suggesting that the Toymaker developed a particular fondness for Earth and its inhabitants due to their love of games. He once admitted he'd fallen in love with humanity. He was really interested in Eastern matters, which explains his frequent appearances as a Chinese Mandarin. However, another account implied that the Toymaker simply enjoyed dressing in extravagant costumes on a whim, often exaggerating stereotypes, and switching between various fake accents to a cartoonish extent. I remember the Toymaker once describing himself as the pan-dimensional counterpart of Walt Disney, Charles Darrow, and Hiroshi Yamauchi. The 1st Doctor criticized him for his childish behavior, noting his tendency to rapidly shift between moods and ideas on a whim. Despite his generally playful nature, the Toymaker occasionally showed us a more serious side, particularly the time when we saw him being genuinely unsettled by the prospect of facing the one who waits. Apart from that, even though the Toymaker is cunning, he insisted he did not cheat in his games. and appeared genuinely offended by anyone who even implied a similar suggestion. But the 14th Doctor confirmed that cheating was the one thing he would not do, as the rules of the game were sacred to him. However, the Toymaker would still try to bend the rules, and we saw what happened when he attempted to catch the Doctor off guard in a game of catch by throwing the ball unexpectedly. By the time the Toymaker encountered the 5th Doctor, he had a rather critical view of how the 1st Doctor had outwitted him in the Trilogic game, lightly reprimanding him for what he considered cheating. However, he didn't attempt to invalidate the outcome of the game. The Toymaker preferred to engage the Doctor through games rather than ask for help directly, seemingly too proud to make such a request. There's even an account that suggests how the Toymaker was terrified of the universe and could barely imagine being forced to leave the toy room. But again, other accounts suggest he visited the outside universe without such fear, and rather reveled in the mischief he caused. How did the Toymaker's elaborate games work? In his celestial toy room, although the Toymaker wielded immense power, his abilities were limited by the rules set for each game, whether by him or his opponents. The 14th Doctor even pointed out that the Toymaker was so bound by these rules that he could not cheat to win even if he wanted to. He was also obligated to follow any new rules he introduced, even if they did not work out in his favor. A good example of this would be the time he wanted to clash with the 15th Doctor, even if it inadvertently meant he had to simultaneously fight the 14th Doctor. However, the Toymaker could bend the rules or casually forget to mention them to his opponent whenever it suits him, and while he wasn't above cheating, he only did so if his opponent cheated first. In one instance, he mockingly claimed that he was simply following a new rule that his opponent had unintentionally introduced by cheating. While being in the middle of the game, the Toymaker could gain complete control over his players' lives and personalities, indefinitely if they lost or died. Besides these children's games, he sometimes played with his guests firsthand, often conjuring up his own playing deck or juggling balls. And we do not know how, but the Toymaker can smell a cheater before a game even reaches its conclusion. After catching a cheating opponent, he would literally forfeit the game after revising their actions, which would inevitably mean they had to exist as one of his many toys inside his toy room. And, like I've mentioned before, the Toymaker hates losing a game, which is probably why he threatened the 15th and 14th Doctor about the arrival of his legions after he lost a game of catch. Is there more than one Toymaker in the Whooniverse? So, during the Doctor's early life, the Time Lord's databanks described the Toymaker as a vague legend, and some of their reports even suggested that there might be several Toymakers rather than just one. Now, the first Doctor, played by William Hartnell, believed that the Toymaker he encountered was actually from the same universe as himself, and had apparently lasted for thousands of years, by the time they first met. He told Stephen Taylor and Dodo Chaplet that this Toymaker was immortal like all Toymakers, thus explaining that the urge to create toys that are ultimately destructive was an unfortunate part of their universe. The Doctor metaphorically described the world as being full of destructive Toymakers like him. Is the Toymaker a being from another universe? Of course, the details may vary, but there are many accounts suggesting that the Toymaker's powers actually come from him being a native of a completely different universe than the Doctor's. For instance, while facing the Toymaker in Blackpool, the 6th Doctor believed he had finally solved the mystery of the Toymaker's origins. He deduced that the Toymaker came from another universe, and was hurled into the Doctor's universe by some kind of catastrophe. I mean, sure, we never got to know what this catastrophe was, but the Doctor believed that this particular theory was the only way to explain the Toymaker's long-lasting durability, and his immunity to the usual laws of physics, even though the Toymaker never confirmed or denied this theory. He did agree with the Doctor on the conclusion that he had actually lived for millions of years. According to what he told the Doctor, the Toymaker used his powers to assist and build entire civilizations for the first few thousand millennia that he spent in the Doctor's universe. But eventually he got bored, and started finding his kicks in the satisfaction of mindless destruction. After spending an equal amount of time destroying everything he had previously built, the Toymaker discovered that his main niche lied in games. These games became his final and ultimate distraction, because they allowed him to embrace his nihilism without falling into inactive apathy, while letting him surrender all to the whims of chance. Now, on a side note, when the 6th Doctor arrived in Blackpool, he had felt a powerful presence that he initially thought was the nexus of the primeval cauldron of space-time. However, he soon discovered that this sensation was actually caused by the Toymaker, who claimed to be the embodiment of the space-time vortex. There are also some accounts that claim the Toymaker to be the crystal-colored guardian of dreams, who counterbalances the other 5 guardians of time. These guardians were the most powerful Great Old Ones, and were known to be the survivors from a destroyed universe where they had once been an earlier race of Time Lords. Some even speculate that all 6 guardians were actually present during the creation of the universe. Plus, I don't know if you guys remember, But while the Toymaker was trying to win Adric over to his side, he attempted to broker a bond with the native of E-Space by mentioning how he was also from a different universe and was born somewhere else. Apparently, the Toymaker was forced to live out his life in a place that was not his own. But as time went by, he seems to have changed his story yet again and claimed himself to be a voluntary exile like the Doctor himself. However, in the same account, the Toymaker also identified himself to the Doctor and Stefan as a great old one alongside being a guardian of dreams. Lastly, there's another account that implies the Toymaker as a being that came from outside of space and time. If you think hard, you might remember that one source had the 14th Doctor describe the Toymaker as an elemental force with the power of a god, and suggested that his origin actually came from outside the universe. He went as far as to refer to the Toymaker's domain as a certain hollow beneath the Underverse. In this particular account, both the Toymaker and the Doctor had suggested that the former had never managed to properly enter the Doctor's universe before the events that led up to the giggle. Now, more recently, with Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor confronting the Toymaker's child Maestro, he described their father as a living game, which further indicated that the Toymaker's elemental nature was actually a manifestation of his games itself, similar to how Maestro was a manifestation of music. Is the Toymaker a Time Lord? As we discussed before, the Toymaker claimed himself to be an involuntary exile just like the Doctor. During this time, he also accepted that although he was from a universe we're not aware of, he was certainly not a Time Lord. Although the origins of the Toymaker were never fully explained on screen, the former Doctor Who script editor Donald Tosh later disclosed that before the Time Lords were established in the canon, the Toymaker was intended to be from the Doctor's own race. However, the 2001 spin-off novel The Quantum Archangel suggests an alternate origin, which portrays the Toymaker as a guardian. The Guardians are usually known to be one of the transcendental beings embodying different aspects of the universe, but this idea has not yet been confirmed in the television series. Nevertheless, in the season 12 episode Can You Hear Me?, the appearance of Zelen, an Eternal, did hint at a possible connection between the Eternals, the Guardians, and the Time Lords. The Toymaker as the Great Old One. So according to the 8th Doctor, the Toymaker came from the Dark Places, but the 12th Doctor believed the Toymaker actually originated from the primordial chaos before time. In addition to that, the 7th Doctor referred to him as an Elder God, who arose during the ancient era at the universe's dawn. There's even another version of the Toymaker story that compares him to the Chinese trickster god No Cha. This account portrayed him as a magical being from a chaotic era, before order was established in the universe by the Time Lords. He somehow survived when the Time Lords imposed their concept of rationality to the universe, and during the times when rationality waned, like during the reign of the Carnival Queen, the Toymaker could step out of his timeless realm and meddle in the physical world again. On the other hand, there's another tale about a certain chap who became overly obsessed with games and began dressing up like a Chinese mandarin. This story places him as a member of an ancient race from the original universe, where everything was perfectly linear until the great houses interfered. But it was only after time travel was introduced that some of these beings descended into utter madness and began using their powers for nefarious or mischievous purposes. How did the First Doctor defeat the Celestial Toymaker? So the First Doctor encountered the Toymaker when he, along with his companions Steven and Dodo, were pulled into the Toymaker's world. Here, the Toymaker ruled over a fantasy realm where he enticed people to engage in his evil games. Those who lost themselves in the process ultimately became his toys. However, if the Toymaker was ever defeated, his world would crumble. But being immortal, he could most definitely craft a new one. He had a habit of taking those who bested him along for the ride, because he simply couldn't stand the thought of losing and wanted to destroy the destroyer. Now, at the end of the First Doctor's era, William Hartnell's Doctor found himself in a confrontation with Michael Gogh's Toymaker within the Celestial Toy Room. The Toymaker believed the Doctor was the perfect opponent because of his superior intellect and wanted to trap him for an eternity. So he challenged the Doctor to a complex game called the Trilogic Game, which was to be completed in exactly 1,023 moves. This game was a pyramid puzzle variant, where a single misstep would seal his fate to eternal imprisonment. But even if the Doctor managed to outwit the Toymaker, the agreement was that the Toymaker's realm would be completely destroyed upon his defeat. Meanwhile, Steven and Dodo had to participate in a series of dangerous games against the Toymaker's so-called toys in order to retrieve the TARDIS. This situation was pretty complex because at this point, the Doctor was stuck between death and the devil. If the Doctor played the decisive move and won, he, along with Steven and Dodo, would be annihilated when the Celestial Toy Room crumbles. So we figured out a rather simple solution. After setting the TARDIS in motion, the Doctor cleverly mimicked the Toymaker's voice to command the game to make the winning move, allowing them to escape, thus destroying the Celestial Toy Room. However, the Doctor was well aware of the fact that his victory was short-lived, because the immortal Toymaker had the ability to fashion a new reality for himself. The Toymaker's return in The Giggle. After almost 6 decades, the Toymaker made his much-anticipated return to the Whoniverse in The Giggle. This episode revealed how the Doctor unwittingly allowed the Toymaker into the real world by invoking a superstition at the edge of the universe. The Toymaker managed to infiltrate the first television broadcast in 1925 by supplying the doll used by John Logan Baird to his assistant, Charles Banerjee. Since then, this particular doll's giggle was embedded in every screen, but only took effect in 2023 when worldwide internet coverage was finally achieved. The giggle wreaked absolute chaos into the world by making every human believe they were absolutely right. So to undo everything, the 14th Doctor and Donna traveled back to 1925, where they found themselves trapped in the Toymaker's realm. Here, the Toymaker tormented the Doctor with a puppet of Banerjee, and staged a puppet show for Donna, which depicted the fates of all the Doctor's companions after her, in the worst possible light. Of course, when she was traumatized, the Doctor tried to reassure Donna and himself that despite their tragedies, his companions had found some happiness. The Doctor eventually interrupted the Toymaker and challenged him to a simple card game. While shuffling the cards, the Toymaker kept boasting about his twisted achievements and claimed how he had played with supernovas, turned galaxies into spinning tops, made God into a jack-in-the-box, and even encountered the Master, who crawled to him on the brink of death. Apparently, this Master lost a game and now lived in the Toymaker's gold tooth. He also made a jigsaw puzzle out of the Doctor's own history, and mentioned something about seeing an opponent he referred to as the one who waits. After admitting that he was too afraid to challenge this being, the Doctor asked for more information, but the Toymaker refused to talk about it, as it was someone else's game. After one round of the card game, the Toymaker won, but the Doctor reminded him that he'd beaten the Toymaker before and suggested a best of 3. After he agreed, the Toymaker declared that the final game would take place back in 2023, and invaded the unit HQ through a musical number, using his toy shop door to teleport, while constantly changing his appearance to unsettle the unit forces. When Kate ordered her troops to fire on him, their shots turned into flower petals. After vanishing into his store door again, the Toymaker reappeared to take control of the unit galvanic cannon on the exterior landing pad. When the Doctor stepped outside to confront the Toymaker, he warned everyone to stay indoors. However, the Toymaker insisted they stay outside as well, claiming that the games do need an audience. Of course, they hesitate, so the Toymaker bends them to his will by firing warning shots at the windows and the floor, ensuring everyone remains present. This is when the Doctor criticized the Toymaker for being so petty, pointing out how someone with such incredible powers could choose to engage in such meaningless acts of cruelty. The 14th Doctor even went on a stretch to invite the Toymaker to travel with him and become a true Celestial by exploring the universe without causing any pain or mayhem. At first, the Toymaker seemed to consider the offer, but ultimately he refused it and explained his newfound fascination for the 21st century humanity. He apparently found immense pleasure in their games of politics, dating, gaslighting, social media, and video games. The Toymaker seemed to be obsessed with the idea of video games, simply for their power to hypnotize players, while keeping them trapped and isolated by their own will. If you've seen this episode, I'm guessing even you did not see this one coming. Because while recounting that his first game was against one Doctor and his second was against another, the Toymaker announced that his final game would be against yet another Doctor. He then shot the Doctor with the galvanic cannon, and instead of regenerating, the Doctor bi-generated, with his 15th self emerging from the intact 14th. I just can't get over how delighted the Toymaker seemed to be by this phenomenon, and rejoiced over how he could cover entire fields with countless dying and dead Doctors. Anyway, the two Doctors then went on to challenge the Toymaker to a ball game, where the first to drop the ball would be the loser. After numerous volleys, the Toymaker finally failed to catch a throw from the 15th Doctor, which ultimately led to his banishment. The Toymaker was then transformed into a two-dimensional fold-up card and sealed in his own toy chest, but he certainly did not leave before mentioning the arrival of his Legion, thus setting up the main focus for the 15th Doctor in the new show. Well, with the Toymaker being banished, order was restored as the giggle faded. Releasing humanity from its madness, the only thing left of the Toymaker was his gold tooth, which contained the Doctor's longtime rival, the Master, who had lost a game to the Toymaker sometime before the giggle. But his tooth was picked up by an unseen person with red nail polish, while no one was looking, and I'm guessing this will all come to a full circle by the end of the latest season of Doctor Who. What does the Toymaker's defeat in the giggle mean? So, we already know that the Toymaker mentioned his legions only during his final moments of freedom in the giggle. Given that he's a being outside the known universe, it's quite apparent that the Toymaker is not alone in his desire and ability to cross that boundary. The introduction of his child Maestro in Gatwa's Doctor Who's The Devil's Cord further confirms that Harris Toymaker was not exactly bluffing. Now that it has been proven that the Toymaker was indeed telling the truth, the door is open for all kinds of fantastical beings to make their debut in Doctor Who. I remember However, Shudigawa's 15th Doctor suggesting that Maestro is a part of a mysterious group known as the Pantheon, which is an assembly of godlike beings who threaten the entire universe and the timeline. I mean, at this point, I think the Pantheon might be another name for the Toymaker's legions, and even has the potential to include whoever the Toymaker meant by the one who waits. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that there may be more of Toymaker's legions arriving to finish what he started. Although with the unwitting help of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the Doctor and Ruby narrowly managed to defeat Maestro in the Devil's Cord. This close call is only an example of the fact that the Doctor's survival against the Toymaker wasn't just luck, as he was able to replicate his success against the Toymaker's child. However, it's somewhat unlikely that Maestro was one of the weaker members of the legions, which is particularly frightening given that their immense abilities had nearly defeated the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday. But it's safe to assume that with Maestro now out of the picture, there could be many other members of the Toymaker's legions ready to step in and finish what Maestro started. Irrespective of everything, I think it's important to remember that Doctor Who's main genre is science fiction, which means most of its villains and scenarios are explained with pseudo-scientific technobabble. However, what's intriguing about the Toymaker's legions, including the Toymaker himself, is that the show now dips into the fantasy realm because these legions are essentially gods with immense powers that fit the said description. On the other hand, the Doctor, despite his superhuman abilities, is still just a biological life form who must figure out how to combat these new godlike villains. While this shift is different, it works well within the show's revamped formula. Of course, it's pretty clear that the Doctor will ultimately prevail, but how the character saves the day becomes much less predictable with the introduction of elements that indulge in fantasy, thus raising the stakes. The Doctor's solutions must become more unconventional, like, for example, the 14th and 15th Doctors defeating the Toymaker by winning a game of catch might seem absurd in a different context, as would the musical fight sequence in The Devil's Cord. Thankfully, the newest rendition of Doctor Who is not abandoning its sci-fi roots, but is blending them with fantasy elements to create a richer, more diverse story arc. How did the Toymaker's appearance fix the inconsistencies within the Doctor Who canon? If you haven't figured it out yet, the Toymaker's incredible ability to alter reality serves as Doctor Who's latest explanation for all the inconsistencies in its canon. Since the show began in 1963, it's changed hands across numerous production teams and lead actors, making it naturally impossible to maintain a perfectly cohesive storyline. Now, the jigsaw puzzle that the Toymaker mentions is actually a metaphor for how challenging it can be to fit the Doctor's origins and backstory together, because in 1996, the Doctor was revealed to be half human. In 2020, the Doctor was revealed to be the timeless child. And again in 2023, Doctor Who introduced the concept of bi-generation. Even Russell T Davies confirmed in the on-screen commentary for The Giggle that Toymaker's jigsaw metaphor is a way to open up the canon. He also explained that bi-generation, which the 14th Doctor had blamed on the Toymaker, is designed to further loosen the continuity. Davies also mentioned that every Doctor is now considered to be bi-generated, allowing all the classic Doctors to have their own new adventures, without being shackled by the established canon. To further top it off, it's actually due to the Toymaker's residual energy that the 15th Doctor was able to clone the TARDIS using a comedy mallet, to again imply that all bets are off when it comes to established lore in this post-Toymaker era of Doctor Who. How powerful is the Toymaker? It's no news that the Toymaker is immortal as well as invulnerable, while having the ability to travel through space and time at his own will. In his toy room, he can efficiently control gravity while being able to fly, animate toys, render people invisible, and teleport across space and time. Not just that, he can effortlessly travel between the toy room and other locations. On top of that, the Toymaker aced a clothing change incredibly while he was teleporting. As if that wasn't enough, the Toymaker can even manipulate reality at his whim, because we did see him turn all those bullets into rose petals, and legit transform humanoid beings into various objects like balls, puppets, and dolls. However, when he loses a game, the Toymaker's reality-bending powers are temporarily transferred to the victor, thus allowing them to claim the prize. This often leads to many different outcomes, because the first Doctor used this power to completely dismantle the Toymaker's realm. The 14th Doctor actually banished him from existence, and well, the 15th Doctor actually got himself a brand new version of the TARDIS, so he could travel around time and space, while allowing the 14th Doctor to retire within the same timeline. Even though the Toymaker's stride of mischief is overwhelmingly long, I've tried my best to collect a precise and compact understanding of his character development over the years. Please let me know what your thoughts are about Doctor Who's most menacing villain. If you want us to cover any other topics related to the Whoniverse, let us know in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone!